Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you didn't see the knife until it was already in your back? I gave up everything, my home, my savings, my peace, because I believed family would protect me. But the moment they thought I was too weak to fight back, they tried to steal the last piece of my life. If you've ever wondered what happens when a woman stops being afraid and takes her power back, watch this story until the very end. And if it stirs something in you, share it with someone who needs the courage to walk away. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that prove it's never too late to reclaim your life. Leave a comment below if you've ever been underestimated, and let's remind the world that quiet strength is the most unstoppable force there is. I never thought I'd see the day I'd stand on the porch of the house my late husband and I built with our own hands, 40 years of memories sealed behind cedar planks, and hand over the keys to strangers. My name is Marilyn Carter. I'm 68 years old, and last winter I survived open-heart surgery I wasn't sure I'd wake up from. That's when Ashley, my only daughter, and her husband David began their gentle campaign. Mom Ashley said, her voice threaded with concern, "You can't be alone anymore. It's not safe. What if something happens and nobody knows?" David sat beside her at my kitchen table, nodding with that quiet authority he always carried, the one that made people believe he knew best. "We want you with us," he said, laying his hand over mine, as if we were all one family with one heart. "You'll never have to worry again. We'll take care of everything." I wanted to believe them. God help me, I needed to believe them. After my surgery, the nights felt longer than they ever had. The house seemed too big for one old woman and a half-empty coffee cup. There were evenings I'd sit by the window, remembering the way my husband used to whistle when he came home from work, the way we'd fall asleep with the television humming softly in the corner. It all felt so far away, like some other woman's life. So when Ashley said, "Come to Florida, let's start over together," I told myself it was time to let go. I told myself it was what he would have wanted for me to stop being so stubborn, to accept help, to trust that family meant something. The decision came fast after that. They found a buyer within 2 weeks, some young couple eager to start their own chapter, and I signed the papers on a damp Friday morning, my hands trembling so badly I could hardly grip the pen. $300,000. That was the total sum of my sacrifice, every birthday candle blown out under that roof, every Christmas morning with Ashley in her pajamas, every quiet Sunday afternoon reading on the porch. My husband and I had worked decades to pay off that house one paycheck at a time, and now the money would become the down payment on a place I'd never even seen in person. I told myself I was ready. When the moving truck came, I watched the boxes disappear, old quilts, my wedding china, framed photographs of a life that no longer existed. I felt hollow, but Ashley hugged me tight, and for a moment, I believed this was love, not obligation. "We're going to take care of you," she whispered. "No more worrying." "Okay." I nodded, but something in her eyes flickered a shadow I pretended not to see. David handled all the closing documents for their new house in Florida. I let him. I was too tired to keep track of it all. He told me it was easier if everything went through him, that he'd make sure every detail was perfect. I wanted to trust that, because the alternative that maybe I shouldn't was too frightening to consider. When the last box was taped shut, I stepped into the doorway and looked back one final time. The walls still smelled like pine and old coffee and the years we'd poured into them. My husband's workbench was still in the garage, the radio frozen on the station he'd loved. I thought about running back in, ripping up the contract, refusing to leave. But my chest still hurt from the surgery, and my spirit felt too thin to fight. So I walked to the car. I left Oregon behind me. I left the last place I'd ever truly felt safe. The highway stretched out like a long, empty promise. I kept telling myself that this was going to be the beginning of something good, that in Florida I would finally stop feeling alone, that my daughter and her husband were exactly who they claimed to be, my protectors, my family. I had no idea that everything I believed that day would soon be turned inside out, that the sacrifice I'd made wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning of a betrayal so cold it would almost break me. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that I was leaving the house we built with our bare hands, carrying nothing but hope, a suitcase full of folded sweaters, and the unsteady faith that I still belonged to someone. I should have known something was wrong the moment I stepped across their threshold. Ashley didn't even look up from her phone when I walked in. She just gave me a flat smile that never reached her eyes and mumbled, "Glad you made it, Mom." Her voice sounded like she was greeting a delivery driver, not her own mother, who had just sold her entire life to be here. David came around the corner, arms crossed tight over his chest, and I waited for him to hug me the way he used to at Christmas. Instead, he glanced at the movers hauling my boxes and let out a sharp sigh. "Can you have them put your things in the guest room?" he asked, like he was already tired of me being in his hallway. "We don't want the living room cluttered." I forced a smile and nodded, though my cheeks burned. The guest room wasn't really a room at all, just a windowless space between the laundry closet and the back door, barely big enough for my twin bed and one dresser. My boxes stacked up to the ceiling, and I suddenly felt like I'd walked into a storage unit I'd never rented. I tried not to let it rattle me. I kept telling myself they were just stressed. It was a big move. Everyone needed time to adjust. But that first night, as I lay on the thin mattress, listening to the Florida cicadas hum through the walls, I heard Ashley's voice drift down the hallway. "She's going to leave eventually." She whispered, her words slicing clean through the dark. "She can't stay forever." David's voice was lower, but I caught enough to make my stomach twist. "I hope not," he muttered. This was supposed to be temporary. She promised she wouldn't be in the way. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. My chest ached in the place my surgeon had sewn shut just months earlier. The next morning, I got up before anyone else. I tried to make myself useful, folded the towels they'd left in the dryer, unloaded the dishwasher. I thought maybe if I helped, it would feel like I belonged. But when Ashley came into the kitchen and saw me stacking plates, her face pinched up like she'd smelled something sour. "Mom," she said carefully, "you don't have to touch our things. We have a system." I swallowed the hurt and stepped back. David walked in a moment later, looked around and frowned. "Did you move my keys?" "No," I said, but he was already rolling his eyes. All day, little things kept happening. My favorite blanket was gone, replaced by a scratchy throw that smelled like the back of a thrift store. My tea mug disappeared. The TV remote ended up in the garage, as if someone wanted to remind me I didn't get to choose what was on the screen anymore. By dinner, the tension was so thick I could barely swallow. We sat around the big oak table I'd helped them buy with the proceeds from my house, and nobody spoke. Ashley served 3 plates. She didn't even look at me when she set them down. I waited, thinking she must have forgotten. But when she finally met my eyes, there was something hard and unapologetic there. "I didn't know if you'd be eating with us," she said. I looked down at the empty place in front of me and realized that was the moment everything changed. I wasn't their guest. I wasn't their family. I was an inconvenience they were already trying to erase. That night, I didn't bother unpacking the last of my boxes. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed and let the truth settle in my bones like a cold draft. They didn't want me here. They had never really wanted me here. I thought of my husband's face and the old photographs of the life we'd built together, of the promise I'd made to Ashley the day she was born, that I would always be there if she needed me. But sitting in that cramped room with the door closed, I finally understood something I'd never let myself say out loud. My sacrifice didn't matter to them. My love didn't matter. I was nothing more than a burden they had to tolerate. And for the first time in my life, I started to wonder how much more of myself I was willing to give before there was nothing left. It was a Tuesday morning when the envelope arrived, one of those thick official packets that always made my stomach clench. I found it wedged between a pile of catalogs on the kitchen counter like it was just another coupon flyer nobody bothered to care about. I picked it up and felt the weight of it in my hands. The return address read, Florida First Credit Union. My heart knocked hard against my ribs. I had no accounts with them. I never had. I carried it to my little room and shut the door. My fingers trembled as I peeled the flap open. The first page stopped my breath. Cold, home equity loan agreement. Amount $180,000. Borrower, Marilyn J. Carter. I scanned the lines over and over, willing my eyes to find some mistake, some explanation that would make this a misunderstanding. But there was my name, my social security number, my old Oregon address listed as prior residence, and at the bottom, my signature. Except it wasn't mine. The M had a strange little loop I'd never made in my life. The tail on the Y curled in the wrong direction. I felt my mouth go dry as I flipped through the rest of the papers, seeing page after page of forged initials. I couldn't remember standing up, but suddenly I was pacing the tiny floor between my bed and the closet. My hands shook so badly I pressed them flat to my chest, right over the scar from my surgery, as if that would keep my heart from coming apart. I forced myself to sit down. I took a breath, then another, and dialed the number listed at the top of the letter. It rang twice before a woman picked up. Florida First Credit Union. This is Carla speaking. How can I help you? My name is Marilyn Carter. I managed my voice hoarse. I received some documents about a home equity loan. I didn't apply for this. There was a pause, a shuffle of papers on her end. Let me pull up your file, ma'am. One moment. I heard her typing the seconds stretching out so long I thought I might faint. According to our records, she said finally the application was submitted last week. It looks like it was signed and notarized in person. I swallowed hard. That's not possible. I never signed anything. I haven't even been to a bank in months. Ma'am, she said, her tone softening, would you mind confirming your date of birth and the last 4 digits of your Social Security number? I did. Another pause. Then her voice dropped to something cautious and serious. I see the file. The notary's seal is here, but if you're saying this isn't your signature, we'll need you to come in and file a fraud report. The word fraud echoed in my ears. I hung up without saying goodbye. I sat perfectly still on the edge of my bed, my hands going numb. Ashley. There was nobody else who had access to my information. Nobody else who knew my Social Security number, my accounts, my signature. I thought about the times I'd caught her in my room moving things around, how she'd insisted on handling my mail, how she'd told me over and over that it was easier if she took care of everything. Easier. God help me, I wanted to believe there was another explanation, but there wasn't. I stood and walked to the little dresser where I kept the file folder with my personal documents. My heart thudded so loud I could hear it in my ears. I flipped through the neatly labeled envelopes, insurance medical records, old tax returns until I found the copy of the limited power of attorney I'd signed when I was in the hospital, the one that allowed Ashley to pay my bills while I was recovering. That document was only supposed to last 3 months. But there, stapled behind it, was a new page I'd never seen, an extension of that power of attorney. My name signed at the bottom, dated 6 weeks ago. I pressed the page to my chest and closed my eyes. This was not an accident. It was never about taking care of me. It was about taking what I had left. I felt something break open inside me, then a cold clarity that replaced the last traces of denial. I thought I'd come here to find safety, to finally stop being alone, but all I'd done was step into the hands of people who saw me as nothing more than a bank account wrapped in old skin. I looked around that cramped room, my boxes still stacked against the walls, my life folded into cardboard, and understood for the first time that this wasn't my home. It was a trap. And I was done pretending it wasn't. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark with the forged document still in my hands, feeling my pulse thumping in my throat like it was trying to choke me. It would have been so easy to pretend it wasn't happening, to convince myself this was all some clerical error. But I knew better. Ashley and David weren't just careless. They were deliberate, calculated. By dawn, I'd stopped crying. I'd stopped shaking. Something inside me had hardened into a quiet resolve I hadn't felt since the day I buried my husband. I was done being their victim. Before anyone else was awake, I slipped my purse over my shoulder and walked 3 blocks to the little electronics store near the strip mall. The bell over the door jingled, and a kid behind the counter barely looked up from his phone. I need a recorder, I said, my voice steady. Something small. Voice activated. He blinked, then pointed to a glass case. I picked the simplest model, a black plastic device no bigger than a tube of lipstick. I paid cash and left without another word. Back at the house, I tucked the recorder deep into the pocket of my cardigan, the weight of it strangely comforting. I felt like I'd armed myself, like I finally had something to fight back with. That afternoon, I waited. I folded laundry I didn't care about. I swept the already clean kitchen floor. I kept moving so I wouldn't explode. When David came home, his shoulders tight with irritation, I felt my heart pick up speed. He didn't look at me as he set down his keys. "Can we talk?" I asked carefully, making sure my cardigan hung just right over the recorder. His mouth flattened into a thin line. About what I held up the letter from the bank, the pages trembling just slightly in my hand. This loan, the one with my name on it. David's eyes flickered. He didn't deny it. He didn't even look surprised. He exhaled hard through his nose and rubbed his forehead. "Marilyn, you don't understand how tight things have been. You should be grateful we've kept this roof over your head at all." I swallowed. "I didn't agree to this. You forged my name." His gaze turned cold. "If you're not going to cooperate, then maybe you should think about where you'd go. Because I'm done covering everything without help. You really think you can make it on your own?" I felt my spine straighten. My hand slid into my pocket and pressed the tiny button on the recorder. A soft red light blinked hidden under the wool. David leaned closer, lowering his voice to a hiss. "If you won't sign, we can't pay the mortgage. If you won't contribute, you're the one putting this family in danger. You want that on your conscience?" My throat tightened, but I kept my expression blank. "You're threatening me," I said. He scoffed. "No. I'm telling you the truth. You're living here because we let you. Don't forget that." He turned away, muttering something under his breath I couldn't catch. The moment he disappeared down the hall, I exhaled a shaky breath and pulled out the recorder. My thumb hovered over the stop button for a moment before I pressed it. The silence that followed felt like a door closing, a final click of understanding. That night, when the house went quiet, I locked my bedroom door and pulled my battered file box onto the floor. I sat cross-legged and spread out everything I had left: the deed to my old house, the receipt for the down payment, the folder of bank statements and tax returns. Piece by piece, I packed it all into a fresh envelope. I didn't trust another second of my life to this place. The next morning before sunrise, I drove to the credit union downtown. My heart thumped so hard, I thought it might burst through my ribs. I rented a small safe deposit box and laid the envelope inside, feeling as though I was burying something precious to keep it safe from thieves. When I turned the key and closed the little steel door, I felt the first hint of relief I'd had in weeks. By 9 a.m., I was back in my room, the recorder tucked inside my sweater again. My hands still trembled, but they weren't weak anymore. They were steady with purpose. The last thing I did that day was pick up the phone and call a number I hadn't dialed in 15 years. "Lawson and Wells," a woman answered. "This is Marilyn Carter," I said, my voice low but unshaken. "I need to speak to Henry Lawson. Tell him it's urgent." I waited, listening to the hold music in the receiver, and for the first time since I'd stepped into this house, I felt something like hope, because I knew this wasn't over, and I wasn't finished. I'd replayed the scene in my mind 100 times, but nothing could prepare me for how it would feel to actually stand there watching them realize I was no longer afraid. It was almost 8 o'clock when I carried the manila folder into the dining room. The overhead light cast a yellow glare across the oak table where we'd shared so many silent meals. Ashley and David were already seated, their plates half finished, their faces tired from whatever lies they'd told themselves all day. I didn't bother sitting down. My hands were steady as I placed the folder square in front of them. Neither moved to touch it. "What is this?" Ashley asked, her voice brittle. "Go ahead," I said calmly. "Take a look." David's jaw flexed. He flipped the folder open, and his eyes landed first on the home equity loan paperwork, the same pages with the forged signature he'd insisted I was imagining. The pages I'd carried to the credit union and copied in triplicate. Beside them was the small black USB drive, the one I'd hidden inside my cardigan pocket, the same drive that held every word David had spit into my face, every threat, every sneer. Ashley's lips parted, but no sound came out. David looked up at me, and for the first time there was something in his expression I'd never seen before. Fear. "You went behind our backs," he hissed. "No," I corrected him, my voice low. "You did." Ashley's hands were shaking as she reached for the stack of papers. "You're overreacting," she tried, but even she didn't sound convinced. I felt my heart beating steady and sure, the way it hadn't since I moved here. "You forged my name," I said, my voice rising just enough that there could be no mistaking the conviction behind it. "You planned to steal what little I had left, And you thought I wouldn't have the strength to stop you." David's face darkened, and he slammed his palm down on the table so hard the silverware jumped. "No one is going to believe you!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "You're a sick old woman. You don't even know what you're signing. You think anybody's going to care what you say." I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached into the folder and pulled out the final piece of paper, the one document that changed everything: the deed. I unfolded it slowly, deliberately, and laid it on top of the pile so they had no choice but to see it. "Read it," I said. David glared at me, his chest heaving, but his eyes dropped to the bold type across the top of the page: "Owner of record, Marilyn J. Carter." I watched his shoulders sag as the truth sank in. Ashley covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide and glistening with something that almost looked like shame. "This house," I said quietly, "was never yours. You never paid for it. You never earned it. You were living here because I allowed it, not the other way around." David opened his mouth, but no words came out. "I will not be bullied." I continued, my voice calm, cold. "I will not be manipulated, and I will not be robbed." Ashley's eyes darted to David's, desperate, but he wouldn't look at her. "You think you can just walk away?" David spat, his tone strangled. "You think you can just leave us here with nothing?" I felt something break free inside me, then a weight I'd carried for too many years. "I think I said you've mistaken my kindness for weakness." I leaned forward just enough that they had to look at me. My heart was steady. My hands were still. I survived burying my husband. I survived a surgery that almost killed me. I will survive this. But you're the ones who will have to live with what you've done. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of the refrigerator. David finally shoved his chair back, scraping it hard against the tile, and stormed out of the room without another word. Ashley stayed frozen in her seat, staring at the papers like they might catch fire. When she finally looked up, her voice was small, ragged. "What are you going to do?" I straightened my shoulders and met her gaze. "Whatever I have to." And in that instant, I knew the power had shifted. They could no longer pretend I was a helpless old woman they could intimidate. They could no longer deny the evidence I held in my hands. I wasn't their victim anymore. I was the one holding the knife, and I intended to use it. The house was silent when I woke up, the kind of silence that feels deliberate, as if even the walls were holding their breath. My mind was clear in a way it hadn't been in months. No more second-guessing. No more hoping that somehow Ashley and David would apologize, that they'd realize what they'd done. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up slowly, letting the certainty settle in my bones. Today, I would leave. Not because they asked me to, but because I chose to. At exactly 7 o'clock, the moving truck pulled into the driveway. The driver climbed out, a young man in a Navy uniform with tired eyes, who looked like he'd seen his share of families unraveling. He didn't ask questions when I opened the door. He just nodded once and started carrying boxes to the curb. I didn't waste time. My hands moved with a calm, practiced rhythm as I packed the last of my life into cardboard and plastic tubs. My wedding album. The silver locket my husband gave me on our 25th anniversary. The faded quilt my mother had sewn when Ashley was born. Every item I placed in a box was a piece of proof that I had existed long before this house, and these people tried to shrink me down to nothing. 2 hours later, my room was empty, except for the dent in the carpet where my bed used to be. I carried the final box into the hallway. David stood by the front door, arms folded tight across his chest. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His glare said everything, that I was the problem, that he still believed he'd been justified. I didn't look at him for long. He was already irrelevant. Ashley appeared behind him, her eyes red and puffy. She opened her mouth like she was about to speak, but I turned away before she could summon whatever excuse she'd been practicing all night. In the kitchen, I laid out the documents in a neat row on the table. First, the deed in my name, the bold letters leaving no room for argument. Next, the copy of my fraud complaint stamped and signed. And finally, the short note I'd typed the night before. I set the note on top and smoothed it flat with the palm of my hand. My fingers lingered on the words, "I'm not running away. I'm only taking back what was mine." I stood there a moment, letting that truth fill me up. Then I turned, walked to the front hall, and picked up my purse. The driver gave me a polite nod as he hoisted the last box into the truck. I didn't look back. I stepped outside into the bright Florida morning, the air thick with the promise of rain. My heart felt light for the first time since I'd set foot in this place. The driver closed the cargo door with a soft thud. "Ready, ma'am?" he asked. I nodded. More than ready. As he climbed into the cab, I stood by the passenger door and took one final breath. Inside the house, I knew Ashley was probably crying again, and David was already thinking of ways to spin the story to make me the villain in a tale he'd written to protect his pride. But none of that mattered anymore, because I knew the truth, and so did they. When I settled into the passenger seat, the driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "You got everything you need." I looked down at my hands, empty now, except for the house keys I'd taken off my ring. I turned them over once before placing them on the dashboard. "Yes," I said quietly, "I have everything that matters." As the truck rolled forward, I felt a strange, beautiful ache in my chest. Not sadness, not regret, just relief. We drove past the manicured lawns and white fences, past the houses that all looked the same. With each mile, the weight pressing down on my shoulders grew lighter. I didn't belong there. I never had. The truth was, I'd spent years believing that love meant sacrifice without limits, that motherhood was supposed to swallow me whole. But sitting in that truck with my life packed neatly in the back, I finally understood something no one had ever told me. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is leave, not because they've given up, but because they've decided to stop giving everything to people who don't deserve it. When we reached the end of the street, I turned my head to look out the window one last time. The house stood there still and quiet, a shell I'd finally outgrown. I didn't wave. I didn't cry. I just faced forward, steady and sure. I had closed that door behind me, and I wasn't ever going back. When the moving truck pulled away from that sterile suburb, I didn't know exactly where I'd land. All I knew was that I had no intention of ever again surrendering my life to people who mistook my love for weakness. I found the apartment by the water almost by accident, a small one-bedroom on the 12th floor of a quiet building in St. Petersburg, where the air smelled like salt and possibility. The first time I turned the key in the door, I felt something settle inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. The place wasn't fancy. The walls were bare, the carpet a little worn, but it was mine. Every bill had my name on it, not theirs. No one here expected me to sign over my future. No one watched me like I was a burden they were trying to unload. On my first morning, I stood by the sliding glass door, coffee in hand, and watched the gulls wheel over the waves. My heart felt bruised, but it was beating on its own terms again. That week, I signed up for a watercolor class at the library. The instructor, a spry woman with silver hair and paint under her fingernails, welcomed me with a smile I didn't have to earn. My first painting looked like something a child would make, sloppy blue sky, lopsided flowers, but I kept it anyway. It was proof I was still learning, still here. On Fridays, I went to the community center for beginners' dance lessons. At first, I was embarrassed, my left knee stiff from old surgeries, my balance unsteady. But by the third week, I was laughing as I turned in slow circles, remembering that my body belonged to me and no one else. I made friends. Women my age who'd survived their own disappointments, divorce, widowhood, ungrateful children, and decided they still deserved to be happy. We met for lunch on the boardwalk, swapping stories, and quietly acknowledging that we were all building something new out of the pieces we'd been handed. One afternoon, as I watered the little jade plant I'd set on my kitchen windowsill, my phone buzzed across the counter. The screen lit up with a number I knew by heart. David. The call went to voicemail. Another came in seconds later. Ashley this time. I didn't pick up. Instead, I sat down at my table, opened the small blue notebook I'd brought from Oregon, and started to write. Today the bank called, I wrote. They've frozen the fraudulent loan. David is under investigation. Ashley will have to explain why she let it happen. My hand didn't shake as I formed the letters. I felt no triumph, no smug satisfaction, just a clear, steady peace. I closed the notebook and watched the waves break against the shore far below. The phone rang again, and again. I turned the ringer off. I remembered how many nights I'd lain awake in that guest room, telling myself that love meant sacrificing everything. That being a good mother meant never standing up for myself. That if I just tried harder, they would see me appreciate me. But they never did. And it wasn't because I failed them. It was because they were never willing to see me as more than what I could give. That was the last lie I ever let myself believe. When the sun began to set, I pulled out the slip of paper I'd tucked inside my journal. Just one sentence I'd written the night I decided to leave motherhood does not mean erasing yourself. I read it again this time, letting the truth of it settle all the way to my bones. I had spent most of my life believing that giving without limits was the only way to be worthy of love. But standing there in that little apartment filled with late afternoon light, I finally understood. Love that demands you disappear isn't love at all. It's hunger. And I was finally done feeding it. I placed the paper back inside my journal and closed it carefully. I didn't know exactly what the rest of my life would look like, but for the first time, I was curious to find out. I poured myself a cup of tea, carried it to the balcony, and watched the water turn to liquid gold as the sky darkened. The phone stayed silent, tucked in a drawer. And for once, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. For most of my life, I believed that love meant sacrificing everything without question. I thought being a good mother was about giving until there was nothing left of me. But the truth is, when you erase yourself to keep others comfortable, you teach them that your needs don't matter. I've learned that no one has the right to decide your worth, not your children, not your spouse, not anyone. Real love respects your dignity. Real love never demands that you stay silent or small. Walking away wasn't weakness, it was the bravest thing I've ever done. Because sometimes the only way to honor the years you've worked, the love you've given, and the person you've become is to finally say, enough. If you are carrying the weight of being everything for everyone, I want you to hear this. You deserve peace. You deserve respect. And it is never too late to start over. If this story resonates with you, leave a comment below and share your own experience. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us it's never too late to reclaim our lives.